Let's get started making our chia pets. We're going to begin with our lump of clay. First, you want to pull off a little extra just for any details that you want to add on, and then make the remaining lump into 2 equal sections and roll them into spheres and create 2 pinch pots. Now the pinch pots openings have to be the same size, but the shape and size of the actual body of the pinch pot can be a little different depending on the shape of your design. Your next job is to score and add a little bit of water to one side and really carefully kind of wiggle and press those 2 halves together to create your sphere. Now once it's connected, you can make it more of an oval shape or make it more of even a pyramid shape, depending on your design. You can see here I'm creating some feet with the extra clay that I pinched off and reserved at the very beginning. And as always, any extra details we'll have to score and use a little bit of water to create a little slip and really smooth those and blend them so they're well attached and they don't fall off when they start to dry. You may have also noticed that I poked a little hole in the underside of mine, and that's so that I could stick a finger inside of it and help shape it from the inside as well as from the outside in case I need to push an area back out. I'm making a hippopotamus, so I'm keeping the body of mine pretty ovalish, kind of circle-ish, and then I'm going to add on the head with another smaller pinch pot. You can see here I'm working to shape that smaller pinch pot into the shape of the front of the snout, since the hippopotamus has such a big mouth and nose area. Again, I'm scoring and slipping both surfaces where they'll connect, and I also go ahead and poke a little hole so that there's air that can pass between the body and the snout so it doesn't trap any air pockets. If you do find you need to use a little bit of water to smooth out cracks and rough areas, just use a little bit on your fingertip and try to avoid using a sponge. Using a sponge can cause that grog, those little rough bits of clay, to come to the surface and create a little more texture than you want sometimes. So just use a little water on your fingerprint and rub it until that shininess goes away so it absorbs into the clay. We can use just some simple tools to press the details in. You can see I'm adding a little bit of extra expression over the eyes just by adding a tiny little coil to make it look kind of like eyebrows. Those simple little additions can really add a lot of personality and expression to your piece. My final added detail here is a little mohawk, and that's the only spot I've chosen to add chia seeds on this one. So I'm just going to have those little chia seeds growing on his mohawk, and everything else will just stay that bare clay. So I'm adding some roughness to that mohawk so that when the chia seeds start to grow, they've got something to grab onto. So regardless of the shape that we want our chia pet to be, whatever we're making, if it's an animal, if it's a person's head, if it's a tree, if it's a whatever, we're going to start with that same process of creating 2 pinch pots that have the same size opening, first twisting off that extra clay and setting it aside if you have any details you're going to add. And then those 2 pinch pots, we're going to make sure that they're open the same amount so that when we join them together, they can match up, and then scratch and attach them together. So here I'm making a face. I decided to do a little sculpting before I connected my pinch pots, but you don't have to. And I'm just scoring up both of the edges really nice and rough, and then adding a little water to one side and pressing and squishing and smoothing those together. And regardless of the shape, you're going to want an opening where you can stick your finger or tool inside of your piece and be able to push out certain areas as you're sculpting and shaping your creation. And you can see for a lot of these details, I'm not adding any clay onto my piece at all. I'm just pushing from the inside of my pinch pots outward and shaping it as I go. So that nose, I just pressed in around it. I pressed from the inside to press that area where the nose is outward, and I sculpted it from there. Here I am adding on some spheres for the eyeballs, and I add on a little bit of a couple small coils for the eyelids after I get those scratched and attached on. So I do add on a little bit, but not much. A lot of it's just done by pressing from the inside out and then pinching and squishing it into the shape I want it to be. Here I'm just carving in a few details, the nostrils, the line between the lips, kind of pressing and sculpting that in. Not everything has to be super deep or stick out super far. These subtle little carvings can add a lot of expression and a lot of detail to our creations. Here I'm just using a tool to smooth that small coil around the eyes to give it a little bit more expression, to make it look like an eyelid. And just a reminder for as you're working, just check for the thickness of the clay. Make sure you're reaching inside your piece and kind of feeling for thick spots and making sure that nothing stays too thick, because it'll take too long to dry and we won't be able to fire it before the end of our school year. So make sure you're checking for that as you work and thinning out areas that maybe got a little too thick. Here I'm just shrinking that hole from the back of his head down a bit by adding a little bit of clay around it because it got a little too large. And I want to be able to carve in some hair, and that's where I'm going to have the chia seeds grow on his head. I also decided to add some ears on, so that's what I'm creating here. I'm making the ears, and then I'll scratch and attach those onto the sides of the face. And again, regardless of what you're creating, make sure that you kind of press and wiggle it onto the table to create a flat spot so that it can set flat and not rock and roll around. So one of the finishing steps is to do that. Write your name on the bottom, clean up any little areas, and make sure that you've got some rough spots where those chia seeds can grow and attach.